Hey Reddit, I'm Adam, 27, and last Thanksgiving, I found out just how much my family didn't want me around. I don't mean the usual passive-aggressive remarks, or the "we just want a small dinner this year" excuses. I mean they literally told me not to come. And when I crashed the dinner anyway, I found something in the garage that blew everything up. It all started 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. I was waiting for the usual family group chat to start blowing up with planning. Who's bringing what? What time to show up? How many side dishes we actually need? But this year, silence. No messages. No plans. Nothing. I waited. Then, finally, I texted my mom. Me. Hey, what's the plan for Thanksgiving? Haven't heard anything. Mom. Oh, well, we're doing something small this year. Just a quiet dinner. I frowned. Because that was a lie. Our family doesn't do small Thanksgivings. There are always at least 15 people crammed around the table, stepdad's weird cousins included. So I pushed. Me, that's fine. What time should I come by? Her response? Mom, actually, we were thinking maybe you should sit this one out. I froze. Because what? I stared at my screen for a solid minute before responding. Me, what do you mean? Mom, it's just, things have been tense with your stepdad's parents. They're getting older. They don't like big crowds. We just want to keep things peaceful. Now I was really confused. Because sure, my stepdad's parents were old and cranky, but they had never been an issue before. And now, suddenly, they were the reason I was being banned from Thanksgiving. Something wasn't adding up. I took a deep breath and called my mom. She picked up on the first ring, which told me she was expecting this conversation. Hey, sweetheart, she said, voice a little too cheerful. I didn't waste time. Mom, why don't you want me there for Thanksgiving? Silence. Then, she sighed. Adam, it's not about not wanting you there. Then what is it? I cut in. She hesitated. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, your stepdad's parents, they just don't think it's a good idea. I clenched my jaw. Because of what? She didn't answer. Because she couldn't. And that's when I knew. This wasn't about them. This was about something else entirely. And now, I was going to find out exactly what they were hiding. So I made a plan. Since I clearly wasn't welcome, I wasn't going to give them a chance to prepare for me. I was going to show up unannounced. And when I did, I was going to find out exactly why they didn't want me there. Because something was off. And I was done playing nice. Thanksgiving Day, I pulled up to my mom's house at 5 p.m. sharp. The driveway? Packed with cars. So much for a small, quiet dinner. I parked down the street and walked up to the house. Through the windows, I could see them all gathered around the table. Laughing, drinking wine, passing plates. Like nothing was wrong. Like I didn't even exist. I exhaled slowly. Then, I knocked on the door. And the moment my mom opened it, her face went pale. Because now, she had nowhere to hide. Her eyes darted behind her, as if she was looking for someone to back her up. Adam, she stammered. What are you doing here? I gave her a cold smile. Thought I'd stop by. Since, it's Thanksgiving. She swallowed hard. I told you. I stepped forward. Yeah. Small dinner. Just family. Except, I pointed over her shoulder. That's everyone in there. So why am I the only one who wasn't invited? She flinched. Then, before she could answer, a voice came from inside. A voice I didn't recognize. Who is it? I froze. Because that voice? It was deep, rough, and it sure as hell wasn't family. I stepped inside before my mom could stop me. And, sitting at the table, staring straight at me, was a man I had never seen before. Older, gray hair, dressed way too formal for Thanksgiving dinner. And the second he saw me, his entire body tensed. Like he wasn't expecting me. Like he wasn't supposed to be seen. I glanced at my stepdad. He wouldn't even look at me. Then at my mom. She looked terrified. And suddenly, I knew. This wasn't about me. This was about who they were protecting. And now, I was going to find out exactly who he was. And why my family had just made the worst mistake of their lives. I stood there, staring at the stranger sitting at my family's Thanksgiving table. Because now it was clear why they didn't want me there. This wasn't about my stepdad's parents. This wasn't about keeping things small. This was about him, and the fact that I wasn't supposed to see him. The tension in the room was thick. Everyone else was avoiding eye contact, except for him, the old man sitting at the end of the table. He was staring straight at me, expression unreadable, like he was waiting for something. I exhaled. Well, I said, looking at my mom. Aren't you going to introduce us? She swallowed hard. Adam, maybe we should. But before she could finish, he spoke. Adam, huh? His voice was gravelly measured. I turned back to him. Yeah, and you are. He tilted his head slightly. Then he smirked. You look just like him. I froze. Because that wasn't the response I was expecting. At all. I heard my mom inhale sharply. Enough, she snapped, voice strained. But now I wasn't backing down. I took a step forward. Just like who? Silence. Then he leaned back in his chair and laughed. Not a normal laugh. A low, knowing chuckle. Like he already knew something I didn't. And suddenly, I needed to know. I turned back to my mom. Tell me what's going on. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Adam, please. Not here. I clenched my jaw. No, right here. Right now. I gestured around. Because clearly, I'm the only one who doesn't know what the hell is happening. Her hand shook. Then, she did something I never expected. She looked at my stepdad, and he nodded, like they had already prepared for this. Like they had already decided that, if I found out, they'd have one story to tell. My mom turned back to me, and then she dropped the bomb. Adam, she whispered, this is your grandfather. I blinked. Then I laughed. Because what? You're joking, I said. Silence. I looked around the table, expecting someone to chime in, to tell me this was some messed up Thanksgiving prank. But no one did. And my mom? She was dead serious. I shook my head. That's impossible. My grandfather died before I was born. She flinched. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, No, that's what we told you. I froze. Because suddenly, everything made sense. The missing invitations. The secrecy. The way my stepdad's parents always looked at me like I wasn't supposed to exist. Because this was a family secret. A secret that was never supposed to come out. And now I knew why. I turned back to the man, my so-called grandfather. He was still watching me, still waiting, like he wanted to see how I'd react. I clenched my fists. So let me guess, I said. You walked out on my dad, left him behind, and now you think you can just walk back into my life. His smirk widened. Your father never told you the truth, did he? I narrowed my eyes. What truth? He exhaled. Then he said something that changed everything. I didn't walk away from him, he said. He walked away from me. I stared at him. Because what the hell was that supposed to mean? I turned to my mom. She looked pale, like she had never wanted me to hear those words. Mom, I said slowly, is that true? She hesitated. Then she nodded, and my entire world shifted. For years, I had believed my dad's story, that his father had abandoned him, that he had to grow up without a real family, that we were better off never talking about him. But now I was standing in front of the man himself, and I had no idea what to believe anymore. I turned back to my grandfather. Tell me everything. He sighed, rubbing his temple. Not here. Not now. I clenched my jaw. No. Right here. Right now. I pointed at my mother. Because my whole life, she told me you were dead. That you were never part of this family. And now, suddenly, you're sitting at our Thanksgiving table. He let out a low chuckle. You've got fire, he muttered. Just like your father. I ignore that. Start talking, I demanded. He looked at me for a long moment. Then, he nodded and told me the truth. A truth that destroyed everything I thought I knew. And when he was done, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just a family secret. This was something so much worse. Something that explained why they had been hiding him from me all these years. And when I finally uncovered the full story, it led me straight to the garage, where I found something that sent my entire family into chaos. I sat there, staring at this man, my so-called grandfather, as he prepared to drop a truth bomb that had been buried for decades. The rest of the family? Dead silent. My mom looked like she wanted to be anywhere but here. My stepdad wouldn't even make eye contact. And my step-grandparents? They looked nervous, which only made me more convinced this wasn't just a family issue. This was something bigger. And the second my grandfather started talking, I realized just how deep this secret went. I didn't abandon your father, he said, his voice low but firm. He ran away. He cut ties with me. With all of us. I scoffed. That's not what he told me. He smirked. Of course it's not. I clenched my jaw. Why would he do that? He exhaled. Then, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. because he didn't want you to know what kind of family you really came from. I froze, because the way he said it, like it wasn't just about him and my dad, like it was about something bigger, something I wasn't supposed to know. And suddenly, I wasn't just curious. I was terrified. I turned to my mom. Is this true? Her hand shook. Adam, she whispered, please. No, I snapped. I want the truth. She swallowed hard. Then, she nodded, and my whole world shifted. For years, I had believed my dad's version of events, that his father was just another deadbeat who walked out, that he had to fend for himself growing up, that there was nothing left behind worth looking into. But now I was realizing he had been running, not just from his father, but from everything tied to him, and I needed to know why. Tell me, I demanded. My grandfather studied me for a long moment. Then, finally, he said, your father changed his last name when he left. Did you know that? I blinked. What? He smirked. No, of course you didn't. He made sure of that. I frowned, because no, I didn't know that. As far as I was concerned, our last name had always been ours. But the way my grandfather was talking, it was like there was more to it, something big. And when I saw my mom's face, pale, terrified, I knew he was right. My father had erased something, and now I was going to find out what. I exhaled. What was our name before? My grandfather hesitated. Then he said it, and when he did, my blood ran cold, because I knew that name. Everyone did. It wasn't just any name. It was infamous. And suddenly, everything made sense. I pushed back my chair and stood up so fast it nearly toppled over. You're lying, I said. He just smirked. Go look it up, he said. See for yourself. I turned to my mom. She was shaking. Why didn't you ever tell me? I demanded. Tears welled up in her eyes. Because we didn't want you to be part of it, she whispered. I clenched my fists. And then, I did the only thing that made sense. I grabbed my phone, went outside, and started digging. I typed the name into Google, and the second the search results popped up, I felt sick. Because my grandfather, he wasn't just some old man. He wasn't just a lost family member. He was notorious. Formerly part of one of the biggest organized crime families in the country. A family name that had been buried under arrests, trials, and years of FBI investigations. And my dad? He had done everything he could to erase that connection, to cut ties, to keep us safe. And my mom? She had helped him. She had known all along, and never said a word. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. This was insane. My whole life, I thought my family was just average. Nothing special, nothing worth hiding. But now, I was realizing I had been living in the dark this whole time. And when I turned back toward the house, I knew exactly where I needed to go next. The garage. Because if my grandfather was back, that meant one thing. He wasn't just here for dinner. He was here for business. And I was about to find out exactly what he was hiding. I marched back inside, ignoring my mother's pleas for me to just leave it alone. I stormed straight through the dining room, past my frozen family, and pushed open the door to the garage. And the second I stepped inside, I knew I had just uncovered something huge. Because sitting in the middle of the garage was a crate, unmarked, sealed tight, too big to be normal storage. And my gut told me this wasn't just old family junk. This was something serious, something that could explain everything. And as I stepped closer, I knew one thing for sure. My family's secrets, they weren't just history. They were still alive. And I had just walked straight into the middle of it. I stood there, staring at the crate sitting in the middle of my mother's garage. Everything in me was screaming that I shouldn't open it. But at this point, I had already uncovered too much. There was no turning back now. Behind me, I could hear footsteps. Fast. Panicked. Adam, stop. My mother's voice was shaky. I ignored her. I crouched down, running my hands along the edges of the crate. There was no label, no markings, nothing to indicate what was inside. Just a heavy-duty lock, which told me one thing. Whatever was in here, it wasn't meant to be found. A shadow loomed over me. I looked up to see my grandfather. His face was blank, but his eyes, sharp, studying me, like he was trying to figure out what I was going to do next. You don't want to open that, he said calmly. I clenched my jaw. Then tell me what's inside. Silence. His lips twitched like he was amused. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. I scoffed. Try me. Before he could respond, My stepdad finally spoke up. Adam, he said, stepping forward. Think about what you're doing. I turned to him. What I'm doing? I repeated. Are you serious? I pointed at the crate. You've been keeping this in our house, in Mom's garage, and I'm supposed to just walk away. His jaw tightened. Then he did something weird. He glanced at my grandfather, like he was waiting for permission to speak. And that told me everything. I took a deep breath. Then I pulled out my pocket knife. And with one hard crack, I snapped the lock off. My mom gasped. Adam, don't. But it was too late. I gripped the edge of the crate and pried it open. Inside, stacked in neat, organized piles, were bundles of cash. Thousands. No, hundreds of thousands. Perfectly crisp bills. I stared, because what the actual hell? A cold chill ran down my spine. This wasn't just money. This was illegal money. This was the kind of money that doesn't get deposited in a bank. The kind that people get killed over. I swallowed hard, then turned to my grandfather. Explain. Now. He smirked, like this was some kind of game, like I had just played right into his hands. You were always going to find out eventually, he said. I clenched my fists. Find out what? That my family launders money? That you're still involved in some criminal sh**t? His smirk didn't fade, but my mother? She looked like she was about to be sick. Mom, I said, voice low. How long has this been going on? She closed her eyes, and then she finally told me the truth. Since before you were born, she whispered. I inhaled sharply. She kept going. Your grandfather was part of a group. She hesitated. A powerful one. I didn't need her to say the word. I already knew. Mafia. But when your father found out, he wanted out. He wanted to cut ties. So we ran. I shook my head. But clearly that didn't last. My stepdad sighed. Your mom kept in touch. Even after your dad left. She thought she was keeping you safe. Making sure no one came after you. I turned back to her. And now, I finally understood. She didn't ban me from Thanksgiving to protect them. She banned me to protect me. Because if I never came near them, I'd never find out. Never be pulled into this world. But now, it was too late. I turned back to my grandfather. Why now? I demanded. Why show up here after all these years? He shrugged. Because your father is dead. The room fell silent. I felt my blood go cold. What did you just say? You heard me. He tilted his head. He passed a few months ago. Heart attack. Didn't your mother tell you? I whipped around. Mom. She looked away. You knew. My voice shook. She nodded. I didn't want you to. To what? Find out I was lied to my whole life? Find out that my father was still running, even after all these years. She flinched. But now, I wasn't stopping. I turned back to my grandfather. So what now? I asked bitterly. You expect me to just carry on the family business? Step into the role my dad ran from? He chuckled. Not quite. Then, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. And the moment he handed it to me, I knew this wasn't just a visit. This was a handover. I opened the envelope with shaky hands. Inside, a single key. I stared at it, then at him. What is this? He smirked. Your father might have left the life, but he didn't leave empty-handed. I inhaled sharply. That key leads to something he left behind, something he didn't want anyone else to have. I frowned. Where does it go? His smirk widened. That, he said, is for you to find out. And with that, he stood up, straightened his jacket, and walked out, like he hadn't just turned my whole life upside down. I sat there, staring at the key. My mother? She was crying. My stepdad? Silent. And me? I had a choice to make. Because whatever this key opened, it was something worth hiding. And now that it was in my hands, I had to decide. Do I walk away? Or do I finally uncover the truth about my father? About my family? And the deeper I thought about it, the more I realized I already knew my answer. I sat at the dining table, holding the key my grandfather had handed me. It was small, cold, and heavier than it should have been. Because this wasn't just a key. This was a doorway to the truth. The truth my father never wanted me to find. And now, I had to decide. I glanced up at my mother. She was staring at me, still shaking, still hoping I'd just walk away. But we both knew that wasn't going to happen. Not after everything I had just found out. So I exhaled and said the words that made her eyes go wide with fear. I need to see what's behind this key. My grandfather smirked. like he had been waiting for this moment, like he knew I wouldn't be able to let it go. He stood up, adjusted his jacket, and said, "Then let's go." My mom shot up. "Adam, no." I turned to her. "You think I can just ignore this?" She swallowed hard. "You don't know what you're getting into," she whispered. I clenched my jaw. "Neither did Dad," I said. And then I walked out the door. The car ride was silent. My grandfather drove, hands steady on the wheel. He wasn't nervous, wasn't hesitant, because to him, this was just business. To me, this was the rest of my life. After 30 minutes, we pulled up to an old storage facility, the kind where the gates were rusty and half the lights flickered. It was abandoned looking, which meant it was perfect, because no one would think to look here. My grandfather stepped out of the car, gestured for me to follow. We walked to Unit 57. The lock on the door? It matched the key in my hand. I swallowed hard, because this was it. Whatever my father left behind, it was right here, waiting for me. And the second I unlocked the door, I knew everything was about to change. I turned the key. The lock clicked. I pulled the door up and froze, because inside, sitting in the middle of the unit, was a briefcase. I took a step forward, slowly, carefully, like the air inside was different, like I had just stepped into something bigger than myself. I knelt down, unlatched the case, and when I opened it, I felt my stomach drop. Inside the case were documents, stacks of them, legal records, account statements, and, at the very top, a handwritten letter from my father. I reached for it with shaky hands, unfolded it, and began to read. "Adam, if you're reading this, then I've failed. I spent my entire life trying to keep you away from this world, from them. But if you found this, then they've found you. And now, you need to decide, will you finish what I started?" I swallowed hard. My hands trembled, but I kept reading. I left behind more than just a new life. I left behind evidence, names, transactions, everything the FBI needs to take them down. I was too much of a coward to finish it. But you have the chance to end this for good. I inhaled sharply. Because what? I flipped through the documents, and suddenly I realized this wasn't just about money. This was a blueprint to destroy my grandfather's entire empire. I looked up at my grandfather. His face was unreadable, but his hands, they were clenched into fists, like he already knew what was inside, like he had been waiting to see what I'd do next. And now, it was my move. I stood up, held the letter in one hand, the files in the other, and then I looked him dead in the eye. "You knew this was here, didn't you?" His smirk was gone, replaced by something darker. "I had a feeling," he admitted. I clenched my jaw. "You let me find it anyway." He shrugged. "Figured it was time you made a choice." I scoffed. "You mean a test?" His eyes gleamed. "Exactly." I looked down at the documents again, because now I knew the truth. My father had spent his life running, hiding, protecting me from this exact moment. But now that I was here, I had to make a choice. Burn the evidence, or end this for good. I thought about my mother, how she had spent years lying to protect me. I thought about my father, how he had left everything behind but never truly escaped. And then I made my decision. I took out my phone, snapped a picture of the documents. Then I dialed a number. My grandfather watched me, didn't stop me, didn't say a word. But when I pressed call, his smirk returned, like he already knew what I had chosen. And when the voice on the other end answered, I said the words that would change everything. "I have something the FBI is going to want to see." That night, my family's empire collapsed. Within weeks, my grandfather and his associates were under investigation. My mother? She left the state. My stepdad cut ties with all of them. And me? I disappeared. Because after everything, I finally understood why my father had run. Some legacies aren't worth keeping. And some doors, once opened, can never be closed.